The United States is currently facing a debt crisis. Despite an approved debt limit of $31.4 trillion, sustaining the country's economy has become increasingly challenging. As of the end of March 2023, America's federal debt stood right up against the approved limit, forcing the Treasury to take extraordinary measures such as reducing investments in retirement plans to avoid default. But these measures can only provide temporary relief. Truly solving America's problem requires raising or suspending the debt limit, and while this may sound simple, changing the limit requires congressional approval, but Democrats and Republicans are divided on the issue. The House of Representatives recently passed a Republican bill to increase the limit by $1.5 trillion, contingent on spending cuts. Democrats, led by President Joe Biden, however, want a clean increase with no attached conditions. This impasse has raised concerns for Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. On May 1, 2023, she sent a letter to Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, addressing the issue. In the letter, Yellen emphasized that without raising or suspending the debt limit, the government would be unable to meet its debt obligations as early as June 1st. She urged Congress to act promptly and also highlighted the consequences of failing to increase the limit, including severe hardship for American families, harm to the country's global leadership position, and questions about its ability to defend national security interests. Adding to the urgency of the situation is the fact that the legislative process required to pass a bill is slow and complex. The passage of a bill in the House of Representatives is just the first step. A bill must still undergo scrutiny, debate, and voting in the Senate. If the Senate approves a modified version, reconciliation with the House is necessary to reach a compromise. At the end of all of this, President Biden holds the power to sign the bill into law or veto it, and overriding his veto requires a challenging two-thirds majority in both chambers. As a result, political division on the issue is jeopardizing America's financial stability, and the specter of a potential default has sparked concerns and discussions about the sustainability of America's financial system and the internal and global ramifications of a default. Renowned investor Ray Dalio has strongly criticized the concept of the U.S. debt ceiling. He likens the politicians seeking to raise it to irresponsible binge drinkers who disregard their limits. He argues that the debt ceiling is an illusion that fails to control the actual debt, and he has a point. Data from the Treasury reveals that the Congress has extended the debt limit on 78 separate occasions since 1960. According to Dalio, the potential consequences of default or non-payment could be dire and include market turmoil and the risk of a steep recession. He also cautions against continually extending the debt limit, as it may erode global confidence in the US as a reliable debtor nation, leading to a crisis of faith. According to him, unless this binge borrowing is curbed, a crisis will eventually bring an end to this destructive cycle. Given this context, it's worth examining the factors that have contributed to America's current situation and the potential consequences of a debt default, and that's exactly what I aim to do in this video. Let's dive in. The US Treasury releases a monthly statement outlining the government's receipts and outlays. In the first quarter of 2023, total receipts amounted to $2.05 trillion, while total outlays reached $3.15 trillion, resulting in a net deficit of $1.1 trillion. This highlights the ongoing issue of America spending more than it earns and is a key factor contributing to the country's ballooning debt burden. But America's debt burden wasn't always high. It hit $5 trillion as a result of investments made in the aftermath of World War II, but declined again thereafter and truly started to grow from the 1980s onwards. Between 1982 and 2002, America's debt grew from $3 trillion to $10 trillion. In the last 2 decades, it has surged from $10 trillion to over $30 trillion. During this period, the US government had to frequently adjust the debt ceiling to ensure debt remained within the approved limit. The most recent increase in the debt ceiling occurred in December 2021, raising it to $31.4 trillion. Absolute numbers, however, do not provide a complete assessment of debt manageability. To gauge this, we need to consider a country's debt-to-GDP ratio, which gives us a better idea of whether or not the country will be able to pay back its debts. From 1950 to 1980, America's debt-to-GDP ratio decreased from nearly 100% to around 35% as GDP grew faster than debt. But since 1980, this ratio has increased from 35% to the current level of 124%. High levels of leverage strain an economy due to accompanying interest costs, and high debt-to-GDP ratios can also lead to increased borrowing costs if a country's credit rating declines. Analyzing the interest costs or coupon charges on government debt between 2013 and 2022, we observe significant changes. Total debt increased from $16.7 trillion in 2013 to $30.93 trillion in 2022. Over the same period, the average interest rate decreased from 2.43% to 2.07% due to global interest rate reductions during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past year, however, interest rates have trended upwards again as countries raise rates in an attempt to curb rampant inflation. America's annual interest bill has risen by over $234 billion since 2013, reaching $604.4 billion in 2022. This represents an increase of over 50% in just 9 years. Interest rates may continue to climb further as central banks try to fight inflation, resulting in a further increase in the debt burden of the US economy. The implications of mounting debt and rising interest costs are significant. Higher interest payments mean less money is available for crucial expenditures such as healthcare, education, infrastructure, and national defense. Increasing debt also raises concerns about a country's credit rating and its ability to borrow at favorable rates in the future. Throughout its history, the United States has never defaulted on its debt, but there have been instances when it came dangerously close, such as in 1979, when the Treasury was forced to delay payments due to a political deadlock over raising the debt ceiling. As things currently stand, opinions among experts and analysts vary regarding the likelihood of America defaulting on its debt. While some believe that historical measures will prevent default, others stress the urgency of addressing the debt ceiling issue. To mitigate the risk of default, however, it is imperative for Congress to promptly raise or suspend the debt ceiling to allow the government to meet its financial obligations. Long-term fiscal strategies such as spending reductions, revenue increases, and addressing structural economic issues should also be explored to promote fiscal sustainability. Regardless of how you look at it, though, the matter is undoubtedly pressing, as the possibility of the USA defaulting on its debt carries significant domestic and global repercussions. A default would have far-reaching implications impacting credit ratings, borrowing costs, market volatility, and investor confidence. It could also lead to an economic downturn and a spike in unemployment and cause the dollar to weaken, resulting in increased import costs and reduced purchasing power for Americans, and inflation that would ultimately leave everyone in the USA worse off. If the present ongoing political impasse isn't resolved quickly, the possibility of default could trigger a downward spiral, resulting in downgrades of US debt and escalating interest rate bills. These problems won't only affect the US economy, but also have global ramifications as the US is a major buyer of many countries' exports. As the largest economy, a US economic slowdown or recession will also have a ripple effect, leading to a global economic downturn. These concerns are only amplified by existing challenges in the world economy, including geopolitical tensions and runaway inflation.